Hello, everybody who's joining. I'm going to give it a minute or two here to let everybody get into the meeting, and then we'll get started. Right, so that number is still creeping up, so we'll give it another few moments here. Okay, time is now 10:01. Looks like we've got most of the registered participants in the call, so we will go ahead and get started. So firstly, thank you for being here. Good morning. My name is Scott Siclari. I'm the statewide compensation manager here at DPA, and I served as the project leader for this, as well as all of the other system maintenance studies that we completed this year. We have our compensation analyst, Jesse Hernandez, our senior compensation analyst, Terry Pickett, and we also have DPA's communications manager, Annabelle Asp, on the line with us today. Now, the purpose of today's meeting is for us, DPA, to provide you with a summary of the process and outcomes of the study, as well as to provide you an opportunity to ask questions, provide feedback, and understand how the study was completed. One reminder, all attendees are muted, so if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A. I believe the chat is available, but we'll primarily be looking at the Q&A, so we will answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation to the best of our ability. So we'll get started by reviewing the agenda. So very quickly here, first we're going to talk about the background and purpose of this study, as well as system maintenance studies in general. We'll go over the steps, no pun intended, and general timeline of the process. And finally, we'll discuss the results and recommendations that have been proposed by the study. Keep in mind, this is intended to be a very high-level summary, so the prepared remarks today will be relatively quick, but that means we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. All right. Sure. Okay, so system maintenance studies are the method by which the state is able to make changes to all or part of the classification system, and that includes the pay structure. The rules define them as the personnel board rules define them as the process used to determine classes and or pay grades and to properly place affected positions into new classes. So that will typically include a review of all affected positions across all applicable state agencies statewide. Now, the criminal investigator study was first proposed in order to differentiate the different types of positions that have historically been placed into that series. And we also identified the need for another unique series to describe forensic scientist positions, since those roles also have a unique set of responsibilities that aren't currently fully described by any of the series that we have at the state right now. So to complete the study, we collaborated with all agencies that employ those positions, so criminal investigators as well as forensic scientists. All right, so as I just mentioned, DHR, we led the study and we met with representatives from several different state agencies that employ criminal investigators to review and discuss the different types of positions that are currently mapped to the Criminal Investigator series. During that review, we drafted new class descriptions, new class concepts, and we also completed a market analysis in order to assign pay ranges. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So class descriptions are still drafts, and they are going to be available soon after this meet and confer on the DHR website. But in the meantime, you can find at least brief summaries of each of the new series in the job evaluation letter, which I'll likely refer to as JEL the rest of the presentation. And that letter has already been distributed to agency HR directors. We do want you to keep in mind that the JEL is still technically a draft. And after the meet and confer, as well as today during the question and answer period, there will be a comment period where you have the opportunity to provide feedback. Right now, that comment period is slated to end on January 31st, but really our department is here for, to support agencies. And often if you have questions about your individual situation or other situations, it's best to reach out to your HR team. But just so you know, you can always reach out to myself and we'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation or to, DHR in general, because that's why we're here. Since distributing the JEL, I want to mention we've actually already received some really good suggestions that we're considering incorporating into the final JEL and the final class descriptions. So if you do have suggestions either now or following the meet and confer, please feel free to send those in. We definitely want to encourage that feedback. We'll also post the slides from today's meeting after the meet and confer. And even though I think I said something differently last week, we are also recording today's presentation, so you can review that if you like. So for purposes of reviewing pay ranges, we use the same generally accepted compensation best practices that other organizations also use to analyze market data for similar positions both in the external labor market as well as other jobs within the state's classified system. Sources of that market data come from our third-party compensation consultant, Mercer. We also use surveys from other independent sources, such as Employers Council, and we also collect data directly from other jurisdictions and government entities, and usually we get that through official public websites. Once we completed that initial market analysis, we met again with the study team to discuss findings, make our final recommendations, and that's when we began to prepare the JEL. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, we will definitely be reviewing your feedback prior to publishing the final JEL. And then implementation is scheduled to occur on July 1st, 2024, pending legislative approval of the governor's budget request. We're also planning on mailing letters to each impacted employee so that you'll be notified of what your new classification and pay range will be. That particular letter will not include any information about your new rates or information about step placement. It will only include your new classification and your new pay range, along with some explanation about what we've done, what we're doing, and what to expect going forward. And those letters are currently set to be mailed sometime in early or mid-February, depending on any changes we might want to make or any updates. But so that means that they'll likely arrive to employees. They're going to go to employees' homes. Those will arrive sometime in February. Okay, so just want to touch on the system maintenance studies impact on the step pay program. So just as a reminder, that program is also going to be implemented on July 1st, 2024, also pending legislative approval of the budget. Placement in the STEP program is determined based on an employee's time in their current class series. So when I say current class series, that means that the time in series calculation is not going to be impacted by this or any other system maintenance study. So it's also important to remember, though, that although the time in series calculation is not impacted, an employee's new pay rate, if they do receive an increase, that's going to be determined based on the pay range of their new classification, not their current one. So just want to make that clear. I'll say it one more time. Although the time in series calculation is not impacted, the employee's new rate will be determined based on their new pay range, not on their current one. So just for example, if an employee is currently classified as a Criminal Investigator 3, and they've spent 4 years in the Criminal Investigator class series, that means that their time in series calculation is 4. If that employee's position then changes to, say, the Field Agent 4 classification, that employee's time in class series is still 4, regardless of that change. But then that calculation of 4 will be applied to the pay range for a Field Agent 4, not the current Criminal Investigator 3 pay range. So I just wanted to mention that, although the presentation is not about steps, we wanted to help you understand how the system maintenance study will interact, and importantly, also how it does not interact with the step pay program. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about some very high-level findings from the study. The team found that there are multiple categories of positions that are currently being classified as criminal investigators. Since the different types of positions have different core functions and responsibilities, we're proposing the addition of 2 new job series, the Field Agent and Forensic Scientist Agent. Now, when we say core function, we mean the majority or main set of responsibilities described in a position description. So that means that there may be some overlap in responsibilities and common goals between the series, but the series are different in terms of the core nature of their occupations. Now, during the class placement process, where we placed current positions into the new classes, we conducted a very thorough, thoughtful job evaluation, and we completed that evaluation based on a few different factors, including but not limited to certain statutory authority that's assigned to different positions, multi-jurisdictional impact, as well as the types of crimes that represent, again, the majority of investigations performed by each position. Now, in addition to that, we also are proposing creating a sort of standard structure of 6 levels for each of these series. And the intent there is to create a more flexible, more complete career path for agencies and employees in these positions to have within that series. So here's a look at the new pay ranges. These are also available to view in the JEL, so please don't feel like you have to memorize all of these right off the top of your head. There's one really important note that I want to mention as you look at pay ranges. So we are not just simply adding new levels to a series. We are redesigning, in particular, the Criminal Investigator series. This is particularly important. The new classes do not mean the same thing going forward as they do currently. So, for example, the current Criminal Investigator 1 class is defined as a fully operational investigator, but the new Criminal Investigator 1 class is defined as entry level. So in the new series, Criminal Investigator 3 will be defined as the fully operational investigator. So if you do want to compare current pay ranges to new pay ranges, in that example, and it's not exact, but in that example, it would be more appropriate to compare the current pay range for a Criminal Investigator 1 to the new pay range for a Criminal Investigator 3, as opposed to comparing the current pay range for a Crim 1 to the new pay range for a Crim 1, because those levels mean something completely different now. So just wanted to call that out as you all have a chance to review these pay ranges. So on the next slide, you'll see some of our contact information. You can definitely feel free to contact myself. I also have we have the email addresses of our 2 senior compensation analysts. Kendall is out for a little while, so for right now, it's probably best to reach out to myself and Terry Pickett. If you have questions about steps, you can also reach out to the step pay inbox, which is, again, separate from this presentation today, but the address there is DPA_step pay at state.co.us. So that's DPA_step pay at state.co.us. And thank you, Annabelle, for posting that in the chat. That is actually all of the prepared remarks that we have today. So, I did promise we have lots of time for questions. So with that, we will get into the conversation. All right, so the first question that we have here is, in the job evaluation letter under new classifications, you have work leader listed as CRIM 3. However, in the chart, it is listed as a CRIM 4. Which one is correct? The chart. So thank you for calling that out. That was also previously called out to me. We'll be updating that in the final JEL, but it is the chart. So keep that in mind. And I do apologize for that error. We were actually making some updates to this based on some other feedback I had gotten from agency HR teams. So thank you and good catch on that one. Was Colorado Winds consulted as part of this assessment? What is their position on this? I can't speak to their position on this. Colorado Winds are notified of all system maintenance studies. I don't know if we have anyone from Winds on the phone today, but the labor relations team at DPA has regular meetings with the Cohen's leadership team, and they were notified of this, but I can't speak to their position on it. Page 3 states the study is intended to ensure the classification and pay structure of these positions is logical, competitive, and similar to other comparable jurisdictions. What is considered a comparable jurisdiction? May we get a transparent list of these agencies and organizations? So I can name a few of the local ones. When we do compensation analysis, we look at surveys, and sometimes these surveys contain, hundreds of submissions from different agencies. We don't just look at local. We look at national, we look at regional, and when we say comparable jurisdiction, generally speaking, in compensation analysis, it means organizations that have similar jobs, hopefully and usually similar scope. For certain other positions, that might mean things like revenue responsibility, number of employees, and the types of duties and responsibilities carried out by those jurisdictions. As far as a list, actually, I did pull it up. We don't have a full list because of those surveys, containing lots of different organizations. But I can say that locally, let me find it here. I pulled it up. Some of the jurisdictions we looked at were Aurora PD, Denver PD, Lakewood PD, Douglas. Actually, Douglas, I don't think we included too much. And a few others, but those were definitely part of the jurisdictions that we looked at. And again, it doesn't mean that the jurisdictions are going to be exactly the same, but we take an aggregate of similar jurisdictions to hopefully come up with the best, most accurate competitive range for any particular position. Will our current pay range change based on the new classification? So kind of short answer, yes, but just to clarify, what we're doing is we're not changing anybody's position. What we're doing is we're changing the classification that is placed on a position. So those new classifications will have different pay ranges than the current ones. So if you're going to be placed into the Criminal Investigator 4 class as of July 1st, 2024, your pay range as of July 1st, 2024 will be that of a Criminal Investigator 4. Was the Department of Revenue consulted for this study? Yes. You mentioned that changes may be made based on feedback that you have already received. Will there be another draft disseminated to affected employees after changes are made before it's finalized? We don't plan on posting a new draft. I would ask that if you have suggestions or feedback on the current draft to send those in, and then we'll likely post, a final JEL. I'll say that there is nothing in statute, there's nothing in rule that says we can't make changes prior to implementation. However, our intent with this comment period is to have um, a final set of proposals and changes that we're going to make at the end of the month. And a big reason for that is we need to start providing more information and details, and we will be around steps, around the fiscal year 24-25 pay plan. We need to start getting more definite, detailed information out to employees. So our intent is to have this finalized by the end of the comment period, which is, I don't know if I mentioned, is currently slated to end on January 31st. But again, I do want to be clear. You can always send in feedback, you can always send in questions. But again, for individual questions about your personal situation, it's always best to start with your HR team because we'll always loop them in as well. All right, this is a longer one, so let me read through it just for a moment. So actually, I can't speak to the exact method that was conducted at each agency. My understanding is that HR drove the process, but consulted with, um, agency leadership. Um, I can't say that individual criminal investigators would have been consulted during the process, but that's also why we have the meet and confer and why we open this up to feedback. Um, and read the rest of that question. Yeah, I think that's my best answer to that question is that, yeah, it was driven by HR professionals. It was not solely conducted by HR professionals. I do know that certain agency leadership was involved in the project. Yeah, that's a good question. How did DHR come up with the term field agent as a separate class series? So let me make sure. It sounds like you're asking how did we come up with the term field agent, and also maybe asking why is it separate? So the first question, we actually bounced around a few different ideas, and that was sort of the best, most aligned name that we came up with for the other series. If you have suggestions around a different name, I would encourage you to send those in. Uh, I would definitely have to, speak with the other study team members, the other agencies to vet that. But uh, that's actually a good question because we did have pretty extensive discussions around what the new series should be called. As to why is it a separate class series? I spoke to that on one of the slides that, a lot of our series do have, and not just these, a lot of our series have some overlap in terms of the responsibilities or goals or purposes of the positions. However, what you're going to see is that the core function or the majority of responsibilities are different between different series. So that's why we separated them. Differences. Read this one again. Some of these are excellent questions, but I just need a minute to read some of them. That's a good question, and I have not been made aware that that's particularly unusual as a way to separate different classifications. I can say that when we say the nature of the crimes investigated, there are certain crimes that some positions investigate and others might still investigate on some occasions, but not as commonly or not as a majority of their role. But I can say that that was something that the study team talked about and came up with. And yeah, as far as why is the nature of the crimes investigated, because I would say generally speaking, any compensation analysis or design of a series, if we see differences in the core function of a role, that is going to drive, whether or not we separate out those classifications. So I hope that answers that question. But if you have feedback about what might be a more usual distinction for different types of positions within different agencies, we are definitely open to that feedback. And I would actually really appreciate if you do have some more thoughts around that to send those in. Investigation considered multi-jurisdictional. I'm reading this next one again. If an investigation considered multi-jurisdictional, if it crosses county borders or doesn't need to be judicial district borders. I'll be honest with you. I relied a lot on the HR team, who are the experts in these types of jobs. We have 680 some classifications within the classified system that the DHR compensation team has to assign pay ranges to. So when we say multi-jurisdictional, I believe there are statutes that apply to that. I'd have to take a look at those again, but I think it's actually all of those may be factored into what we mean when we say multi-jurisdictional. One example, and I don't want to get too specific because again, I'm not as good with the vocabulary around these positions, so I do just want to state that. But I know that we have some positions within the Department of Corrections that they may investigate crimes that occur within a correctional facility, but then they might also go out and continue that investigation out in different jurisdictions depending on the nature of the crime. So let me read the rest of that question. State agency posted statewide jurisdiction to investigate all manner of crimes. By this definition of all homicide occurs in a single jurisdiction. Does that alter the job duties? Yeah. So, and I would again state that it is possible that all of these types of roles could. I don't know if there are specific roles that can't, but I believe that almost all of these roles could investigate roles in multiple jurisdictions. However, we're focused on the majority of investigations that are expected to be performed by these positions.
Scott, sorry to interrupt. If you could please read the question aloud, so everybody can hear it. I know some of them are long and you're reading them silently first, but before you answer, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I think it'd be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Annabelle. Right. So next one is the term major crime is extremely subjective across law enforcement as a whole. How does DHR define major crimes? Is it based off of media exposure, political sensitivity, potential monetary loss, pervasiveness in the community, statewide jurisdiction, all of the above? Was the definition identified and documented beyond typically major crimes include homicides, human trafficking, arson, etc.? There are a few examples of crimes. In particular, we're planning to incorporate organized crime into our sort of list of major crimes, but I agree with you. The term major may mean different things to different people. We don't have a broader general definition of major crimes. But again, that is also something that the study team bounced around and talked quite extensively about. So that is again another area that if you have an idea of what kind of term might define these different types of crimes, because I do think there is an inherent difference, and some of those, actually all of those factors you mentioned could factor in to what a person might refer to as a major crime. But I and the study team do believe that there is a distinction between crimes like homicide, arson, those other ones that you've mentioned, and say, and again, this is not to speak like different crimes are, like someone's job is more important than someone else's job. But I think there is a distinction between a crime where a cannabis dispensary has not been in compliance with a particular law versus a position that is regularly required to investigate those types of crimes that we've listed there. So that's the best way I can answer that question for now. But again, I would certainly be open to hearing feedback around what could be a better term, or, if you disagree that there's a distinction between those types of crimes, then, we would certainly be open to hearing more details about why you disagree with that. Take a quick sip here. There is no reference in the new criminal investigator or the new field agent definitions regarding if the positions require the skill sets of Colorado post-certified police officers. Does DHR recognize the significant differences in the job duties and responsibilities between detectives, investigators, agents who work in post-certified positions as opposed to those who do not? Would it be more realistic and accurate to delineate between a criminal investigator and a field agent based on the position's requirement to be performed by a post-certified police officer? Further delineation within the new class series could be made at the levels within the series based on the kind of post-certification the employee is required to possess in order to perform the job duties. So I believe all field agents and all criminal investigators are post-certified positions. We don't currently distinguish between different types of post-certification when we say it's required to have post-certification. The distinction between the series is, again, based on the types of investigations and the types of jurisdiction and authority and the statutory authority that is assigned to these different types of positions. So I think that would be my best answer to that question as well, is that it did not necessarily, or we did not, at least did not necessarily discuss the different types of post-certifications. We certainly do distinguish in our classified system, though, between positions that don't require post-certification and those that do. Right. The memorandum that was sent to us with the case study with the new classifications contradicts itself. In the two separate places it mentions job evaluation factors. One says criminal invest. Yes, so that was actually asked previously, and that was an error in the JEL. That was actually called out prior to the meet and confer as well, and we'll be updating that in the final job evaluation letter. The correct job evaluation factors are that a criminal investigator 4, a criminal investigator 3 is fully operational investigator. Criminal investigator 4 is a staff authority or work leader. Criminal investigator 5 is a senior authority or unit supervisor, and criminal investigator 6 is a leading authority or manager. And let me actually, before we delete that, Annabelle, let me double check. One says criminal because of work leader. My current pay rate is 18 with Crim 4. If I get classified as Crim 4, I will be, because step A is advertised, but if I get classified. Yeah, I think that that answers that question. That was a mistake, and it will be corrected in the final JEL. Yeah. Can you explain how you define a fully operational investigator? So fully operational is not a term that just applies to criminal investigators. It applies to any role. There's other terms that are used out in the world to describe what we would call a fully operational position. These might be career level roles. I've heard that term, journey level roles. But typically what it means is that that is a position that can independently perform all of the typical expected duties of a role in that category. So, as opposed to a entry and then intermediate level, fully operational would sort of be that full-fledged, independently operating investigator. And indeed, that is a similar term that we use at the state for pretty much every single series. Someone be moved down in a job class? For example, could someone be moved from a CI2 to a CI1 equivalent? I would find that very unlikely. I cannot speak to every single class placement that occurred. I can say that I did double check, and according to the data that I currently have from agencies, no one will be above the maximum of their new pay range. And also, if you think about it, it would be pretty that would be a pretty big change if someone were from currently in the criminal investigator 2 class, the current one, and then they move to a criminal investigator 1. I see you say equivalence. Let me actually make sure I answer that question correctly. Uh, the job evaluation factors for criminal investigator 2 apply most closely to the job evaluation factors for criminal investigator 4. That does not mean that every criminal investigator 2 is going to be mapped to criminal investigator 4. However, for that reason, I would say it's pretty unlikely that somebody would move down in a job class like that unless something changed about their position description um, or their responsibilities that they're assigned. Good question. What role does EHR play in an agency's final review of class placements? So we work with the agencies to kind of take a final look at the aggregate class placements. For example, if I had a spreadsheet sent to me that had 50 different criminal investigators all classified as a criminal investigator 6, well, I would probably call that out and say, well, it's very unlikely that you have 50 leading authorities or managers in your organization in this world or in this in this department. So um, yeah, we're kind of the final reviewer. We don't usually get into individual positions. We sometimes do if there's a question about a specific position description, but we're sort of we're sort of the final reviewer, and we provide a lot of guidance to the agencies in order for them to be the primary drivers of the class placements. So the next question is the table base salary cost to range minimum by classification holds no context for the lay employee. Would you explain how to interpret this chart and provide the source of the figures numbers? Sure. Yeah. So when we say base salary, we mean your regular cash salary that in particular what's listed in the pay plan. Those are our base salary, monthly base salary numbers. When we say base salary cost to minimum, it means the difference between an employee's, if applicable, the difference between an employee's current base salary and the new minimum of their new pay range. So we have sort of our, preliminary class placements that we've already gone through. And if an employee's current rate falls below like let's say the employee's current rate is $7,000 and the minimum of their new their new class is $8,000. Well, that employee's pay rate would necessarily have to be moved to 8,000, the new minimum for their pay range. And then what we do is we extend that out. So, a $1,000 monthly cost would result in a $12,000 annual cost. And that's how we make that calculation. So the source is based on the employee's current salaries and the new pay ranges. And the new pay ranges were based on that market analysis that I mentioned that was completed. The next question is, who are we compared to in this study? Since we are post-certified criminal investigations, we were compared to other law enforcement agencies who are required to be post-certified. Where can I find this information from the study showing who we were compared to? So we addressed this one a little bit earlier as well, but typically other positions that would have been used in the market comparison would have been post-certified if they're in Colorado. If we have data that's coming from national sources, I can't necessarily speak to the different types of certifications that other states or other jurisdictions have. I mentioned that in compensation surveys, companies that run compensation surveys, they will roll up data that's been provided by many different agencies, many different employers. And we don't necessarily have a complete list of all of those employers that are included in the surveys. Sometimes they're not even available. They're kept confidential, so that data comp data can be kept confidential. But yeah, I did mention at least locally, one of our analyses specifically looked at, a few different local agencies: Aurora, Denver, Lakewood. Those were all specifically identified in our market analysis when we looked at the pay ranges. So how does the series account for subject matter experts? Subject matter experts are currently paid as Criminal Investigator 2, even though they are fully operational investigators. I'm glad you asked that. So if you look at the job evaluation factors, you can see the term staff authority mentioned. Typically, if you think of a SME, you think of somebody who has advanced specialized knowledge of a particular area. That doesn't mean every single staff authority is going to have exactly the same sort of structure to what they're assigned. But yeah, I mean, I would say the Criminal Investigator 2 level, as I mentioned previously, and this does not mean every Criminal Investigator 2 is going to be a Criminal Investigator 4, but the current Criminal Investigator 2 most closely aligns with the Criminal Investigator 4 in the new series. So that is how the new series would account for the SMEs. Yeah, so the JEL states complete classification descriptions for the new series are available. We sort of wrote that in the present tense. Those will be available shortly following the presentation. We might actually need to step back and incorporate some more feedback into those before we can post the final ones, but we will post drafts after this meet and confer. So I do apologize that you had trouble looking at that, and I commend you for reading that very closely. I really do. But yeah, we used the present tense, but really it should have said will be available following the meet and confer. And that's actually something we'll probably incorporate into future system maintenance studies. I've been here since April, and we did 1 last year and 5 this year. So that's actually really good feedback. I appreciate it. The JEL has a chart for fiscal year 24-25 pay grades, yet concludes with the statement, calculations do not include fiscal year 23-24 across the board increases. This is confusing. Are you able to clarify how the pay ranges were calculated? So when we say calculations don't include annual across the board increases, that means when we do our cost to min analysis and we talk about salaries, we weren't guessing what somebody's salary would be on July 1st, 2024. We're looking at folks' current salary. And that means that we did not factor in the expected annual across the board increase that will occur. Now, if it says fiscal year 23-24, you know what? Let me actually pull that up real quick to double check. So you're saying page 9 across the board. Fixed assumptions in the calculation of increased cost. So what that means is that number quoted just above that is what we would call the fully loaded cost, which doesn't just include base salary cost. It includes benefits, retirement. Those cost calculations would not have factored in salary increases. So a salary increase will, of course, increase also the cost of certain other benefits that are provided to employees. Things like if we get a percentage match on a 401k contribution, well, if you have a higher salary, that match amount is then going to go up. So what that means is that across the board increases were not factored into that. We used employees' current salaries. So are employees able to appeal decisions of where they were placed if they disagree? System maintenance studies are actually not subject to appeal, similar to other situations. However, you do have the same process available to you at any time to review a position description. So if you think your position description does not currently align with what are the actual responsibilities and requirements of your role, you can certainly follow that process and appeal that. But the actual class placements they're not actually subject to appeal in system maintenance studies. If you incorporate new feedback, do we have another meet and confer? The answer is no. This is the only meet and confer. So, I definitely encourage you, if you have feedback, to send that in. However, like I mentioned earlier, that final job evaluation letter is intended to be final. But again, we are here to hear feedback. You can always reach out to your HR team about your individual situation. But yes, following this comment period, the intent is for that letter and those class descriptions to be final. So if you are currently a Criminal Investigator 2 work lead, will that classification be moved to a Criminal Investigator 4? Talked a little bit about this as well. Not automatically. It wasn't necessarily an automatic mapping from one to the other. However, my answer, at least from my, broad look at the classification descriptions, the current Criminal Investigator 2 does most closely align with Criminal Investigator 4. But I do want to caution that, we currently only have the 4 levels of Criminal Investigator plus the intern level. We do only have 4 levels, so it is possible that certain positions that maybe ought to be different levels have been collapsed into the same one because we only have those 4 levels available. But, on a high level, the current Criminal Investigator 2 does most closely align with Criminal Investigator 4. Next question is regarding field agents, will consideration and an opportunity for dialogue be given to intangibles such as expertise in a field of study or investigation, unofficial, official leadership responsibilities, and other things that were recently considered with the Equal Pay for Equal Work initiative? Yes, I would say that those intangibles, depending on what you mean by intangibles, but I would say that the consideration is based on what's in the position description, the requirements and responsibilities of the position, not necessarily the qualifications of an individual occupying a position. But let's say if and I don't necessarily have all the vocabulary to identify what different SMEs might be responsible for, but if a position is expected to have a certain level of expertise in a field of study or investigation, that would certainly be taken into account when mapping these positions to the new classes. Will there be cost of living increases in addition to the step pay program? This shows 22% increase over the course of 25 years. This is less than 1% a year average. I will send to the DPA step pay email as well. We don't, at least I have not yet been involved in using the term cost of living increases in an official capacity. We do annual across the board increases typically. I know there were a couple years during the pandemic where we did not. But those increases that we provide are based on market data. So we're looking at what is competitive. We might take into account things like inflation, but typically we will look at what the market is doing, not at what the cost of living is. And that is a standard practice for compensation analysis out in the world. The class series for criminal investigators versus community parole team leader are nearly identical. Why are they not the same in pay? And why will my time with the state not count? So we did not look at community parole team leaders. I don't know if that's what the class is called. I think it's community parole. manager, I think is the name of the current class. Again, we have like 180 classes. I can't remember the specifics of each one, but I don't believe that community parole team leaders were considered in this, but if they have identical descriptions, then they would have been. But I might need some more clarification. I might actually need to reach out to an HR team to understand that a little bit better. And then to your second part of your question, why will my time with the state not count? I actually am not sure exactly what you might be referring to there. If you're talking about steps, step placement is based on time in series. That is what was negotiated with Cohen's. I can't really speak much more to, your particular situation, but it's not state service. It's time in series, time in your current class series that will count towards your step placement. So hopefully that helps at least a little bit in answering your question. All right, the next one, the class series for criminal investigators versus, oh, I just already read that one. The next one is if employee salaries are above the step for that series, but below the newly designated maximum pay rate, will the 3% cost of living adjustment scheduled for July 1st, 2024 begin? So real quick, I know that these are probably being typed in before I've given some answers, but we call it across the board. It's not officially referred to as a cost of living adjustment, at least not in any of the projects I've been a part of in my time here. But let me just make sure I understand the question. If employee salary are above the step for that series, but below the newly designated maximum pay rate, will the 3% be given? Everybody receives the 3% across the board increase. If an employee is above the max, and it's pretty rare at the state compared to my previous time in the private sector, but if an employee is above the max of their pay range, there's something called saved pay that applies. So if an employee is above the max, instead of getting an increase to their base salary, they would get a lump sum payout that's equivalent to that. I know with the rules of saved pay, if an employee's pay rate after 3 years is still above the maximum of their range, then their salary can be decreased to the maximum of that pay range. But the short answer to your question is yes. All right. Next one is, how do we address laterals when we hire people with X amount of law enforcement experience? Where do they fall in the steps in starting pay? This is a key detail asked of us during recruiting. When trying to get experienced personnel, it appears pay is determined on time and series. Yes, step pay. The rule with steps, and this is something I like to make clear. And again, today's presentation isn't exactly about steps, but the rule with steps is that nobody can be paid below their step. That is the high level rule with the step pay program. So you are correct. Pay, or at least step placement. There's other factors that can go into pay, but step placement is based on time and series. As far as hiring folks with, outside the state that have experience, the different agencies have different practices for how they hire folks from outside the state. My guidance to them, and indeed what is required by various regulations, not just the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, but also regulations that have been in place for many years. Practices have to be consistent. Employees need to be treated consistently in terms of the application of policies. Doesn't mean everybody gets paid the same, of course, but in terms of how decisions are made, those processes have to be applied consistently. But you're correct. Again, step placement is based on time and current job series. The next question is, how is the pay grade determined? Why was forensic scientist started as A11 with a required degree? So pay grades are determined through, market analysis that is done by looking at data from surveys, looking at data that we pull directly from various public sources. But just like any other role, forensic scientist 1 would have been compared to the market data that we have for similar positions. What does that equate to for current supervisors, CRIM 3 and leads? Since you stated current CRIM 1 would move to the new CRIM 3. And I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that if you're a current CRIM 1, you're going to move to a CRIM 3. I want to be very clear about that. What I am saying is that in the new series, the level that most closely aligns with the current Criminal Investigator 1 is Criminal Investigator 3. But again, I mentioned how because we only have 4 levels right now, there might be 2 different positions that maybe ought to be different levels. And they've both been collapsed into one because we only have those 4 levels available. So I just want to make sure it's known very clearly that it's not an automatic, if you're a CRIM 1 now, you're going to be a CRIM 3. So that out of the way. If you look at the job evaluation factors for a CRIM 3, the current CRIM 3, the new level that most closely aligns with the CRIM 3 would be a CRIM 5. So hopefully that answers your question, along with that very important disclaimer that I added there. So what are the deciding factors for classifying an employee as a criminal investigator versus a field agent? We've touched on this a few times, but essentially it's, what are the core majority of responsibilities that are required of a position? There could be some overlap in terms of the common goals or responsibilities that different positions have. But, when we talk about what is the difference is when there's a different set of a majority of responsibilities, the core function of various roles. So if one position is primarily responsible for investigating the types of crimes that we've listed in the description, there might be another role that occasionally has to investigate one of those crimes, but the field agent series is intended to reflect positions that the majority of the responsibilities are required to perform those types of investigations. Yeah, so will there no longer be a CI intern, or will that be considered the CI1 now? The CI intern level most closely aligns with the CI1. That's you are correct. The term intern is actually used in a lot of different series at the state, and it's not used consistently. So in this series, it's intended to be the entry level. So we're going to call that a CRIM 1. The term intern is, going forward, actually, we're looking at some other projects within DHR to sort of address that. But the term intern going forward, we intend to have it be used more similarly to how it's sort of used out in the world, which is almost like a pre-entry level. All right, hello. Why were none of the statistics or comps used for the study not presented in this presentation? You did not even provide definitions as to what you are considering as core functions of the job. So the core functions of the job are what we're describing in the occupational descriptions that are listed in the JEL. The statistics or comps used for the study, that would be a very extensive presentation where we would sort of need to provide some training about how to view those statistics. Comp is a highly specialized field. It's very logical. I'd say that if you think about, if we go out and we were to collect 150 data points around, what does this organization pay for this type of position? What does this type of position pay? This organization pay for different type of position? We would aggregate that. Usually we look at the median as opposed to the average, just because outliers play a smaller role with the median. But it would really be a much more extensive presentation and require quite a bit of, even training around how to look at compensation data in order to present it. So if you do have interest in that, I definitely reach out to your HR team, if you're curious about how comp analysis is done. But essentially it kind of follows that process where we take a look at hundreds, sometimes thousands of data points for different jobs, and we aggregate it, and that's how we determine it. That's the best answer I can give for that at this time. All right, the next one is, what is the plan for increase or decrease of pay for these positions, and working with JBC to see how we shore up cash funded budgets with appropriation that will not meet this change? What is the plan for this? Uh, I That's a great question. Cash funded agencies, cash funded departments, the step pay program, as well as other system maintenance studies, and as well as costs associated with system maintenance studies, are funded. However, you're correct. Cash funded budgets are still cash funded, and we did discuss with agencies that are cash funded how to, whether or not they can absorb these costs into their budgets. And we do not make recommendations that those agencies have not had a chance to review and understand what their budget impact will be. So as far as what is the plan for increasing or decreasing of pay, by the way, no one's pay is going to decrease as a result of this. Actually, with this particular system maintenance study, I can even say I just double checked the data before this, but no one is above the max even, and even if they were, no, their pay would not decrease except for, saved pay would apply, which I touched on earlier. But yeah, that's a great question about cash funded budgets. And I guess my best answer is that I can assure you that that was discussed with agencies who were able to take a look and ensure that they can absorb those changes into their budgets. Is the field agent classification being applied to only one agency or possibly multiple agencies? Which agencies? Great question. Answer your first question is no. Answer your second question, nothing's final at this point. We're still in the preliminary stage. You'll get that letter in February that tells you what your classification would be. And I would encourage you to maybe sort of wait until those official notifications go out so you can understand more about, who's been classified as what. But what I can tell you is that all classifications in the classified system are available to be used. However, it's up to appointing authorities to determine what types of positions do they have or need, I should say, in their organizations. So that's the best answer I can give for that at this time. Next question is, after 3 years, what happens to those staff who are deemed to be overpaid? I don't like using that word, but I appreciate what you're saying here. It sounds like we're saying over the max based on the universal reduction in pay caused by expanding. There is no universal reduction in pay. I want to be clear about that. And I'd encourage you to, if you are hearing information about a reduction in pay, I would, I would actually be curious to hear a little bit more about that. But the saved pay concept that I mentioned earlier, um, so the way saved pay works is if you are above the maximum of your range, and this isn't just about system maintenance study, this is part of rule. This is any situation where an employee might be above the maximum of their pay range. They'll receive those lump sum payouts in lieu of base pay increases. So like if your salary is, I'll just do this for math purposes. If your salary is $100,000, and that's over the max, well, if the ATB is 3%, instead of going up to $103,000, you're going to get a lump sum payout of $3,000, taxes and all that. But that's how that saved pay works. Example, mid-range CRIM 2, 86K. We start our CRIM 2 at 88K. Now, I did mention this, and I want to be very clear. When you compare the current pay ranges to our new pay ranges, CRIM 2 is no longer going to mean the same thing as it currently does. The new CRIM 2 is an intermediate level. The current CRIM 2 is a work lead, I believe. So those are very different levels. Is it possible that pay reduced? No. How much lead time will be given to staff so they can make arrangements? Yeah. So pay will not be reduced as a result of the system maintenance study. All right, so is there information available how the new classifications will possibly affect para retirements? Now, I do know that some positions in the enforcement and protective services occupational group have statutes or different rules that apply to their percentage that they get or some of their retirement benefits. However, the system maintenance study will not impact those. I mentioned how salary changes could impact individual situations. Um, I'm not an expert on para. I'm familiar with how it works, but I can say that the system maintenance study will not affect any of those benefits that are currently offered. A little too much coffee before this. For clarification, what are the new classifications that an employee is placed into based on? Is time and rate part of the calculation? So classifications, the class placements are based on the responsibilities and qualifications of the required for the position. They're not based on the individual qualifications of the person occupying the position. They're based on the responsibilities and qualifications required of the position. That's listed in the position description. Yeah, is series and classification the same thing? So series are, I used to call them job families. You can think of them as like a category of job. Usually a series will have a series will have multiple classifications within it that are usually they have progressive levels of scope and responsibility or complexity. So an example is we have the accountant series. Within the accountant series, we have 4 classes: accountant 1, accountant 2, accountant 3, accountant 4. So a class is like your job code, and a series is like your job category. That's kind of the terms I often use when I'm explaining the concept of a series versus a classification. So, did you review all the position descriptions prior to placing us? Who in our area for Division of Gaming Criminal Investigators had a say in the position descriptions? So, I personally did not review many of these position descriptions. There's hundreds of positions involved in this, so we collaborated as a team. And I mentioned a little earlier how DHR's role in reviewing the class placements is really as sort of a reviewer. Maybe you could a trainer, providing guidance. We're sort of a consultant. Like I gave the example, if I got 50 class placements back coming as Criminal Investigator 6, well, I would call that out and say this is probably not correct, and I'd probably push back on that. But as far as your particular area, I don't know if I have a name for you right now. It would have been your HR team. Uh, you know, Definitely reach out to them to make sure you understand who all was involved in that. And I think typically HR teams would involve agency leadership. As far as who has a say in the position descriptions, authority actually lies with the appointing authority. There are mechanisms in place for classified employees to appeal what's in their position description. But that ultimate authority with defining position descriptions lies with the appointing authority of each agency. I love answering this next question. Is it possible our pay will go down based on the new ranges? No, no one's pay will go down based on the new ranges. All right, if you're above the max and you receive 3 years saved pay, will lower to the max after 3 years. That is the rule in personnel board rules. Again, based on the current preliminary placements that we have and the data that I see, no one involved or impacted by the system maintenance study will be above the maximum of their new pay range. I made sure to double check that right before this because I figured that would come up. But the short answer is yes. After 3 years with save pay, your salary will decrease. Your salary, a person who's above the max will decrease to the max of their range. And that's not just a system maintenance study thing. That's something that's been in board rule. Yeah, so forensic scientist agent, is that correct? Does it include agent? So that's actually one of the suggestions we received after we sent in the job evaluation letter. If you have thoughts about whether or not to include the word agent in that series, please let us know. That's not in the current JEL because that suggestion came in, the JEL draft, because that suggestion came in after we published that, but good catch on that. And again, if you have, thoughts around whether or not to include that word in the title, please let us know. These pay ranges include a cost of living raise, or would that be added on to the minimum? We've seen this question a few times, and I know I've addressed the term cost of living. Um, so uh, um, I'll talk a little bit about, I didn't touch on this yet, but I'll talk a little bit about what we call the order of operations. So on July 1st of every year, there are usually multiple types of increases that occur. So in the past, when we weren't doing steps, the order of operation, that's actually really still the same order of operations, but the way it works for not system maintenance studies, for positions that aren't involved in system maintenance studies, the way it works is is that everybody gets that across the board adjustment. If after that across the board adjustment, you're still below the minimum of your pay range, then your rate moves up to that new range. That's for positions not involved in system maintenance studies. For positions that are involved in system maintenance studies, well, it's actually more beneficial to the employee because first, your rate will move up to the minimum of the new range. So it'll be higher than it was before. Now that percentage across the board increase will be applied to that new salary. This year, after those two steps occur, then folks will be moved to their step. And just as a reminder, no one's salary will go, if you're above your step, you're not going to go down to your step. But I hope that question about or I hope that statement about order of operations addresses that. And kind of short answer to your question, the across the board increase will be if you are below the minimum of your new range, you'll be moved to that minimum first, and then you'll receive the across the board on top of that. Only for system maintenance studies. Just want to be absolutely clear about that because that question does come up every year. How do we dispute our placement if we do not agree? So I talked about this again, but just in case you didn't hear, which totally understandable. Your system maintenance studies results are technically not subject to appeal. However, you do have processes for classified employees to appeal what's in your position description. And you can always go to your manager, your HR team, if you do have questions about your position description, or if you feel something is missing or needs to change about that. So who at DOR was consulted? I don't necessarily want to get into specific names of people. Your HR team was involved. The reason I don't want to mention specific names is because there were people involved in different meetings, different people involved in different meetings, different discussions. But there could have also been other people at DOR that were involved that I actually never spoke to. So I don't want to necessarily name names, but if you reach out to your HR folks, they should be able to tell you. I also don't want to, they probably would be best to answer that question. So I don't want to get too far into that at the moment. Can you provide more information on what each level would include as requirements 1 through 6? Also, if a person is reclassified at a different level, will they be at the same step as they are now rather than on the first step of that new series? Yeah, so start with sort of the second part of that question. Your time in series is not impacted by a system maintenance study. So if you've spent 8 years in the Criminal Investigator series, your time in series calculation is 8. That time in series calculation of 8 would then be applied to the new pay range for whatever your new classification is. So that's sort of the second part of your question. You would not just be placed at the first step. Your time in series is still going to be the same, regardless of whether your class changes or not as a part of this system maintenance study. Now, the first part is, can you provide more information on what each level would include as requirements for 1 through 6? There'll be, in terms of the structure, I mentioned how the current Crim 1 class most closely aligns with the new Crim 3 class. And, we're still within DPA. We're still working on what the official minimum qualifications will look like when this rolls out. Those actually won't be published until the beginning of the fiscal year. But that's when you'll have sort of exact minimum requirements. But it is also possible that for different positions, there could be slight tweaks or differences in what the specific requirements for different positions are. So, and I don't know, I think I might have forgotten to mention it, but we would expect, say, if a Crim 1 currently requires a bachelor's degree and, I'm just going to make something up just so I don't touch on too many specifics. Let's say a Criminal Investigator 1 requires a master's degree and 10 years of experience. Well, then, because Criminal Investigator 3 most closely aligns to Criminal Investigator 1, I would expect the new requirements for Criminal Investigator 3 to closely align with the current requirements for Criminal Investigator 1. And that would be true for all of the new levels. Can you say once again when letters are to be sent out regarding notification? Yes, I can. February. So we're going to send them out sometime in early or mid-February. Postal Service might take longer to get that to you, but I would expect you to receive it by the end of February. All right, next one is, what if we are currently a criminal investigator, but our job does not fit into either the forensic scientist or field agent classifications? So current criminal investigators may still be placed into the criminal investigator series. So we are adding, or we're changing the levels of the criminal investigator series, but whatever class series most appropriately defines what is in your, or whatever class series description most closely aligns with what's in your position description, and that's regardless of the system maintenance study. That is the series that your position would be placed into. So that could include criminal investigators, could include forensic scientists, could include field agents, could include, port of entry, could include any of the series. But I would expect, most of the folks on this call, if you're currently a criminal investigator, you will fall into one of the three. So can you please discuss the distinction between the new criminal investigator and the field agent? We've touched on this a little bit. The main difference is, what is that core set of responsibilities? What are the positions required to spend the majority of their time doing? And there's, we talked a little bit about the question around major crimes, which, the study team does believe there is a distinction between, the different types of crimes that we have. Well, the different types of crimes that exist, that are different types of crimes. So that would be the main distinction. We also talked about jurisdictional responsibility. There are some other factors, but it's that core set, the majority of responsibilities that are required for a position. Will new position descriptions be provided to agencies, or do we need to develop new ones with the new classifications? I would not expect PDs to change as a result of this. PDs would only change if the duties of a position changed. What we're doing is we're changing the classifications on the positions. Now, I know in the system, and I'm not really involved in the actual technical side of CPPS or how data is tracked. There may be cases where the title or the job class is listed on the position description. So we would, there would need to be a process for updating that, which we would sort of rely on the agencies to do. But position descriptions aren't changing as a result of the system maintenance study. We're simply changing the classifications on currently existing positions. Do you know which agencies will be adding the field investigator position? Yeah, I talked about that a little bit. There are a few that we do know, but I want to be clear. These series are. I don't want to get into individual discussions because it might imply, if I say just as an example, if I say DPA is adding the field investigator position, that doesn't mean that every position at DPA is going to be classified to that position. I want to be clear, though, that all of these series are available to all agencies to use if the appointing authority, who has responsibility and authority over position descriptions. The appointing authority decides what types of positions they need in their organization. So really that question is up to the appointing authorities. And I'm sorry I can't provide more specifics at this time, but I don't want to give some information now that turns out to not be true in the future. Yeah, so if a Crim 1 moves up to a Crim 2, what would a Crim 2 or Crim 3 move up to? We'll just emphasize it again. There's not like an automatic one-to-one mapping of the current levels to the new levels. But so any change is going to be based, whether you're a Crim 1 now, whether you're a Crim 2, whether you're a Crim 3, any change is going to be based on what is your current position description compared to what is the description of the new classifications that we're adding. Well, these new classifications change our para standing. If you're referring to like the statutes that define differences between, like I believe firefighters, which I know aren't part of this, I know state troopers, I think, have a different statute that applies to them regarding para. That will not change. These are still subject to the same rules and regulations that they currently are subject to. Can you please talk about the large pay grade difference in the level 1, level 2, and 3 between the field agents and forensic scientists? Yeah, it's based on market analysis and market data. So sometimes you see small jumps from level to level, sometimes you see large jumps from level to level. There's a lot of reasons why different jobs out in the market could have different sort of progressions. But short answer is essentially based on market data. So is there an explanation as to why the CI series min-max was moved down in relationship to the new series? Will CI series be a lower pay grade? And, talk about this, Jonathan. I'm sure you've heard the answers, but just to reiterate, the new series are different from the current series. So to my knowledge, none of the pay ranges are actually, like if you look at the most closely aligned, I talked about how Crim 1, the current Crim 1 class, most closely aligns with the new Crim 3 class. And if I recall, looking at the data, none of the pay ranges for those types of comparisons will be decreasing. Is it fair to say a current Crim 1 will be a Crim 3, current Crim 2 will be a Crim 4, current Crim 3 will be a Crim 5? Who's a Crim 6? That is, I want to say it like that would not be fair. Just because I want to say it's not like an automatic one-to-one. Different agencies will, review their positions and they will make decisions based on the responsibilities and qualifications required for that position. It is not an automatic change from one level to the other based on a mapping relationship. Can you please give a firm definition of time in class? If a field agent promotes into a management role, is their time as a field agent counted when they promote? So they jump above AICs that came into CBI with LEA experience, but not specifically. I think the only I don't necessarily need to know, but I will say the only acronym I actually knew there was CBI, but that's totally okay. I can answer your question. Definition of, remember, we're talking about time in series, not time in class. Firm definition, where I really would like to point you to would be the Step Pay FAQ website. The step that we have an estimator on there where you can type in some of your job history, and for most cases, that's a pretty good estimate of where you would end up in steps. Although it's not official until you get that letter, which will occur prior to March 31st. Remember, that's a separate letter from the system maintenance study. There will be a letter specific to steps that is not related to this study. But time in series means all the time that you have spent within a particular class series. So if you're in the accountant job series, the number of years you spent as an accountant 1, the number of years you spent as an accountant 2, like let's say you're currently an accountant 3. So all your time spent as an accountant 1, an accountant 2, and an accountant 3 will count towards your time in class series because all of those classes are part of the same series. I might have missed it, but how do we find out if we are being reclassified, and will it be by the January 31st deadline? we'll be sending out notifications in February about what your new classification would be. We want to have that comment period prior to sending out those comments. Excuse me. We want to have the comment period prior to sending those classifications, just in case. I wouldn't expect too many major changes to these series at this point. However, if there were, we want to make sure that we can incorporate those and look at those before we send out those classification letters. So that will occur in February. Can these pay changes result in someone being paid less than they currently make as a result of the reclassification? No. There is concern about the section mentioning that if your current pay is higher than the max salary range, then you can keep that salary for 3 years. I mentioned it a few times, so that is a rule that applies in all cases, not just with system maintenance studies. And to my knowledge, that's been a rule for some time. But I can say, just double checking the data again, based on what we currently show, and everything is always subject to change. Based on what we currently show, no one is above their max that's involved with the system maintenance study, and that case will not apply to any of these positions. Can you talk about the para and retirement table for the classes? Will forensic scientists be included in the trooper or agent para table? I'm actually not familiar. So field agent is a new term. So I don't believe the term field agent is mentioned. I would actually have to reach out to some of my agency partners to understand exactly which statutes apply to which classes regarding para. And honestly, we do have a separate team that handles benefits, and para is actually a separate organization. I know, enough about, what those benefits are and what they mean, but uh, forensic scientists, as far as state troopers go, actually, I can tell you that state trooper, they have their own classifications, and it's the positions in those classifications that will apply to that trooper para table. I just got an IM from one of my handy HR partners that says CBI agents are considered safety para as well, all of them. So thank you for letting me know that. Hopefully that adds a little bit extra answer to your question. Why are the percentages not the same across the board from year 1 to 25, according to the fiscal year 24-25 pay rate? I think you're referring to maybe I think year 3 is the step is defined as being 5% above min. Year 8 or year 5 is defined as being, can't remember, but I know that the first half of the lower half of a pay range, the progression is faster than the higher half of the pay range. That's actually a pretty common practice out in the world, and that's because usually pay ranges are designed around the median, or excuse me, the midpoint. The midpoint of a pay range is what we want to align with the market rate for a particular classification. So if somebody's below that rate, most pay systems will be set up to get them closer to that midpoint a little bit faster. And then once somebody's above that midpoint, a lot of times organizations will not move it up as fast. But that said, that's only for steps. If somebody's already paid above their step, they're not going to decrease to their step, and everybody is still eligible for that across the board increase. So depending on what you're referring to, I hope that helps answer that question. But again, that is a compensation best practice, and it's part of how steps was designed, which was all negotiated with Cohen's. When are we going to be informed as to what classification we fall in? That will happen in February. I know this meeting is specific to the STEP program. That's okay. But would our HR team be able to give us an idea of where we would sit as far as the new classification and STEP within that classification is at this point in time? They will be. I encourage you, to ask questions, but I also encourage you to remember that the official calculation will not You'll receive that by March 31st. That's when you really want to make sure you take a look at that notification. That notification will list out all of the different uh, all the different classes that count towards your time and series calculation. So, if you had 3 years as a Crim 1, 2 years as a Crim 2, and 4 years as a Crim 3, those three time periods will be listed on the letter that you get, and you'll see exactly what played into that. And let me just make sure I answered all of your question with our HR team. So HR and DPA, we're still reviewing employee time and class series. HR doesn't necessarily, well, HR doesn't decide. There's a formulaic process. We have a whole team of developers working on it. The state has a lot of different disparate systems and systems that are old. They don't talk to one another. So it's actually really hard to get that exact time and series calculation. So we are still working on that. So I would actually wait to reach out to your HR team on that. But you'll definitely get more details about that before March 31st. When our cost of living increases assessed by the state at other agencies, cost of living is a separate and distinct assessment from the STEP program, and on an annual basis, uh, the on an annual basis. Sorry, let me start over. I got a I am there. And on an annual basis, a cost of living assessment would be conducted, and when the STEP programs would be updated based on the cost of living. More transparent reporting of steps versus cost of living. So again, we don't typically use the term cost of living. The across the board increase that is proposed each year to the JBC, subject to approval by the legislature, those are that analysis is done on an annual basis. It's actually starting to come up. We have to have our annual compensation report, which contains those recommendations. Those have to be delivered to the governor by October 1st. And by November 1st is when the governor has to submit that budget request to the legislature. So that's when that analysis occurs. Why is there a large pay disparity amongst criminal investigators in different agencies? If there's a difference in salaries, I can't speak to that. Salary decisions are not made by DPA. You would have to sort of refer to your, and there's a lot of factors that go into actual base rates. But I can say that classifications will have the same pay ranges across agencies. For new employees or those not following previous discussions, will all criminal investigators be classified as either field agent, forensic scientist? There will be effectively three types. There will be three series. There's currently one called criminal investigators. Going forward, there will be three called criminal investigators, field agents, and forensic scientist agent is what's currently suggested. Definitely open to different names if you do have thoughts there, although we'll have to align as a team because we have to have sort of a consistent structure across agencies. Some will stay as criminal investigator series and some will be reclassed as the new types. Yes, some may stay as criminal investigators and some may become field agents. Some may become forensic scientists. What is the process? And, I did get notification. We are running short on time. So we have about half an hour left, but I just want to mention, we still have 68 open questions. So if I have to kind of move fast or, maybe skip over a few that we've already answered, just want to give you fair warning there. What is the process requirements to move between the tiers, i.e. level 3 to level 4? Classifications are always going to be based on the responsibilities and requirements listed in a role's position description. So there may be different mechanisms in place that different agencies have to move positions from one class to another. However, what I can say from DHR's standpoint, the design of the class system is that the requirement to move from one level to another, or to be classified as a position, I should say, it's based on the responsibilities and qualifications required by the position description. I'm a Crim 2. The step indicator shows I'm a job grade A18. A18 shows my class title as a Crim 4 who will be reclassing my position. So remember that a Crim 2 is, it sounds like you understand that. Crim 2 most closely aligns with a Crim 4. I actually just want to make sure I see that. Annabelle, is there a way you could bring that one back up. I actually sort of lost my train of thought as that question disappeared. But for now, let me move on, and I'll come back to that. Hopefully I at least touched on it a little bit before I lost that train of thought there. There is a statement that calculate, and I apologize. We are trying to kind of pick up the speed a little bit. There is a statement that calculations do not include fiscal year. We talked about this. So does this mean that the pay ranges listed may be adjusted for the 5% fiscal year 23, 24? I actually have to go back and check. That section is actually something we sort of work with our workforce analytics team to, because they do that sort of final calculation of costs. It may be better that we say fiscal year 24, 25 with that. I do want to double check that, but essentially what that means is that it's employees' current salaries that we're using to calculate the cost of the changes associated with the system maintenance study. Will the series starting in July 1st, the pay ranges be adjusted by any across the board increase? So these pay ranges that we're doing for system maintenance studies, the ones you see in the job evaluation letter, those are the ones that will be implemented based on for fiscal year 24-25. We have already done an analysis to what we call age our market data to July 1st, 2024. There's compensation best practices associated with the methodology for doing that. But essentially what that means is that we don't incorporate those across the board increases into the cost analysis. We use employees' current salaries. So these pay rates in the tables from the JEL are not competitive with the Denver Front Range market. Metro area patrol level police officers equivalent to our CRIM 3 individual that are investigating major crimes are at 110K per year or higher all across the Front Range. For the majority of CRIM series, staff also works and lives. How did the study account for the job market where most staff work and live? The state has a defined labor market. We do sometimes look at local jurisdictions that I sometimes rely on the HR folks at agencies to help me know which are the most important jurisdictions we look at. As far as the statement that they are not competitive, we do that market analysis to make sure that we are proposing competitive pay ranges. Compensation, just like most areas of expertise, is not an exact science, so there could be differing opinions on that. However, when we do this analysis, the intent is certainly to make them competitive with the state's defined labor market, which is indeed the state, not necessarily just Denver or the Front Range. Does post-certification and arrest powers factor into this at all? I would say broadly, yes. To my knowledge, criminal investigator and field agent roles are both required to be post-certified. But short answer is yes. That was factored into the market analysis and all of the recommendations that we have.
Scott, pardon me, I had a request to put the slide back up with the different classifications, so I'm
sure.
Gonna
Please go ahead. All right. DOC investigators conducted 6 homicide investigations in multiple jurisdictions in 2023. We only conduct felony investigations. The field agent definition defines our duties. Yeah, that's more of a statement rather than a question. And I'll say that is certainly going to and has been taken into account when we've done the class placements. Do you know how previous relevant experience will be factored into the recalculation of people's salary? If you're talking about steps, time in current series is what will count. There could be other mechanisms in place that an agency takes to look at previous relevant experience, but in terms of steps, we're only looking at time in your current class series, and that's because that's what was negotiated with Cohen's. Oh, I do want to mention there. Okay, so I'm sorry, I might not have misunderstood your question fully. Time in series is not impacted by system maintenance studies. So if you spent 8 years as a criminal investigator and then you're moved to the field agent class, to the field agent series, you will still be counted for that 8 years of time in series in the criminal investigator series. Glad I caught that before we moved on. Complexity of investigations conducted might be a better measure for the classification, not listing exact crimes. Homicide investigations can be complex, but so are many other types of investigations surrounding sophisticated money laundering and financial crimes. Yeah, and the term complex can mean different things in different contexts, out in the world, but also in compensation analysis. And I certainly appreciate that, Michael. None of this is intended to say that one area of investigation is harder than another. We're primarily looking at, what does the market require in order to, and this is, I'm quoting a little bit of words from here from the state's compensation philosophy. What are the market rates or what are the pay ranges that we need to assign in order to recruit, motivate, attract, and retain, um, effective employees? But yeah, that's excellent feedback. And let me just make sure I'm addressing that whole comment there. Yeah, I appreciate it. Actually, the study team did talk about, do we list specific types of crimes? Do we not? And we did land that it seemed clear to list at least a few types of crimes. And I think that also alludes back to the fact that the term major can be sort of a subjective term. Is it ultimately up to the individual agency to decide where their investigators fall, or is this going to be a DPA decision? It's a collaboration. I mentioned we relied on the agencies to sort of drive those class placements and provide the initial proposal. But DPA, we're not, the state personnel director technically has authority. Who's the head of DPA is the state personnel director, but we do rely on agencies to drive those class placements. Can we get the link to the draft JEL or slides? I think that might have been posted in the chat, but if we want, Annabelle, if we can, perhaps we could post it again. How do the new proposed pay ranges compare to the most recent pay ranges from fiscal year 22-23? Unless I'm incorrect, it looks like the new pay ranges are less. So I think this is also alluding to the fact that, the current CRIM 1 is not the same as the new CRIM 1. So with this update, in terms of how we would expect folks to be mapped, no one's pay range will decrease. Instead of major crime as a crime against a person, any criminal charge with a 1 or more prison sentence is normally considered as a major crime. It's actually something we never discussed. I hadn't heard that distinction in terms of the number of years in a sentence that would apply to a major crime. And I noticed you did capitalize major crime there. So it sounds like there may be sort of a standard definition, or at least one that maybe, you are familiar with. If you'd like to send that suggestion in, I can certainly get back with the study team over the next week and see if that is something that we all think might be a good possibility for perhaps updating the series description to be more clear. Can you explain the reasoning behind why field agents are paid at a higher rate than forensic scientists? So again, the pay ranges are based on market analysis. It's not my opinion. It's not, agency leadership's opinion. It's based on the market data that we have. Have those positions which change from criminal investigator to the new field agent series already been identified? And if so, could you inform us, or is that still being evaluated? That you will receive a letter in February that will let you know what that information is. I'm going to really try to pick this up now because I see these questions are from about over an hour ago. So DOC investigators are now statutorily responsible for capturing fugitives in Colorado as of 2023. Understood. And to my knowledge, that was taken into account in terms of how class placements have occurred. CRIM 1, wait, let me make sure I got one. Yeah. CRIM 1, CRIM 2, and CRIM 3 are all designated as individual contributors. What determines the shift from CRIM 1 to CRIM 2, supervisor evals, a separate job posting, is the responsibilities and requirements listed in the position description. With this new pay scale, does this mean we are all looking at pay cuts? No. Of the various other agencies that were polled for comparison, their detective investigators get paid the same regardless of their area of expertise. Why is the state differentiating these? I can't speak to why other agencies have certain pay practices. I know that a compensation best practice is to make sure I understand this. Why do investigators get paid the same regardless of their area of specialty? Um, yeah, I mean, different types of roles have different market rates. And in the data that we found, the data that we looked at, the jobs that match more closely with field agent classification descriptions, do carry a higher market rate than those for other types of criminal investigator positions. The types of investigations seem limited to what are commonly thought of as dealing with dangerous environments and dangerous criminals or dealing with crime scenes. A lot of state investigators work anti-fraud cases. Has the state taken into account that people who commit fraud are very frequently violent criminals, and that fraud cases are quite often far more complicated than your typical major crime, like homicide? A multi-million-dollar fraud case is a major crime. Yeah, all of that would be taken into account. Um, I can't speak to exactly which positions were classified as field agents and which were classified as criminal investigators, but again, we are definitely looking for more feedback, as desired, around, what suggestions there might be out there for updating the descriptions to more clearly define the difference. Um, but yeah, that's good feedback, and that is certainly taken into account. The study team did discuss fraud cases, in particular those that may be reflecting very large sums. It appears that a police officer one has a higher starting pay than a criminal investigator one. I believe, okay, typically you need a 1 year of experience as a police officer one to be qualified to be a criminal investigator one. So criminal investigator one now is you would need experience as a police officer one to be, or previous experience to be excuse me, let me back up. For the current criminal investigator one class, it would typically be expected that you would have experience elsewhere in law enforcement. The new criminal investigator one class is truly intended to be an entry level. Now, on that note, most criminal investigators, most field agents, to my understanding, usually do have experience. And most of the positions require experience. So I would not necessarily expect those classifications to be used that often unless there were positions in the future that were truly entry or intermediate level. We've been told as CBI crime scene analysts that we would fall under the forensic scientist classification. That description does not describe what we do. We are assigned under CBI investigations and respond with field agents to multi-jurisdictions, are required to be on call, work after hours and holidays, investigate major crimes. Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to individuals class placements at this time. If there are more questions about that, I mean, if every position has been mapped based on which series most closely aligns with that position and sort of the majority core function of what each role is responsible for. Which agency will be using the field agent classification? We did talk about that. I can't necessarily say exactly which agencies because I don't want to, give you one set of information and then and also it's possible and then have it change in the future. And it's also possible that an agency could use both. They might have criminal investigators, they might have field agents. When talking about pay grades, hypothetically, if I were a Crim 1 at the midpoint range and I applied for Crim 2, would I get the pay starting from the midpoint? So different agencies have different methods for placing employees when they get hired into a new position. The only rule with steps is that no one can be paid below their step. But if you were to move from, if any employee was to move from like a Crim 1 to a Crim 2, the time spent as a Crim 1 would still count towards the time in series, even though they're moving to Crim 2. Along with pay ranges, was there any consideration to increasing vacation paid time off? That's not part of the scope of this study. Benefits, I believe, are handled statewide, but that was not a part of this study. How is the difference between minimum, midpoint, and maximum pay grades determined? Good question. We actually have a standard, what we call pay range width, and that too is based on multiple factors. Usually, we look at market data to look at how wide are these pay ranges typically. I believe for this particular class, I think it's the minimum is 83% of the midpoint and the maximum is 117%. Oh, I won't try to do that math right now, but It's also based on typical practices in the market as well as certain strategies that may be taken by the state. I know there are often agencies that hire at the min, so sometimes at the state we might have a narrower pay range in order to, say another organization has an 80%, 120% split. Well, if we have 83%, 117, that gets the minimum up. And right now at the state, we do have a lot of folks near the minimum. So in general, that will benefit the employee. Are there plans for staff to go to the top of the range? We are unsure if this has been done in recent history. The top pay of a criminal investigator 3 is 10704. Is this only based on time of service? Different agencies will have different methods for placing employees into a pay range. Lots of factors might go into that. The only real requirement by statute and by just general guidance is that employees be treated consistently based on the policy at that agency. The compensation analysis was completed. Did the state take all compensation into account? Benefits para. This particular study is for base salary. The class series for Criminal Investigator 2 versus Community Parole Team Leader are nearly identical. I saw that earlier, and I'm really not familiar with the Community Parole Team Leader. If that is a working title, this is based on the actual classification of Criminal Investigator 2. I know we have a I think it's Community Parole Manager series, but that series was not included in the system maintenance study. And again, time spent in a current series is what counts towards step placement. And that is because that is what was negotiated with Cohen's. Does this take on call pay, into account call pay, or will on-call pay ever be given to those who are on call and expected to report 24/7? So this study from DPA standpoint was based on base salary only. We did not look at call pay. Speaking specifically to criminal investigators, was previous law enforcement experience taken into account prior to placing in criminal investigators in the series? The placement of a position into a series was based on the responsibilities and requirements listed in a position description, not based on the experience of the individual occupying the position. Who makes the decision on what class a person is placed in? It is a collaborative effort. We primarily relied on HR at agencies to drive that, since they are the experts in their own agencies and their own positions, but we collaborated as a team. So if I saw something that seemed a little bit out of sorts or not logical, I would certainly ask questions and review that, but it was primarily HR with collaboration with DHR. Sounds like you have solicited feedback on many points and have acknowledged that many items were not considered. Was the best and most efficient way for us to communicate with you and your team to ensure that all of the information we have discussed today is considered? I would say if there's a lot of feedback coming through, personally, I would request to perhaps filter that through your HR team, and they will be able to sort of compile that, and then we can discuss as a study team what we might want to incorporate. Now, if you're not comfortable sharing that with your HR team, please, feel free to send to us. However, I do want to let you know, unless it's something truly sensitive that you do not want discussed internally with your agency, we will typically, the first step we will typically do is loop in the agency HR team. So short answer is first step HR, but if you need to escalate it, can certainly come directly to myself. Is the term work leader for the new Crim 4 class equivalent to the term team leader? Yes, the team leader. So you notice that the term team leader no longer exists in the new class descriptions. You don't want anybody to worry too much about that until you get your hands on that classification letter. The study team did discuss that quite extensively. And since team leader is not a term that's used in any other series, it's not a standard term that we use at the state and is pretty ill-defined because, again, it's not used elsewhere. We're not using that anymore. But the term work leader, that is going to be, you'll see in the class description, that will have a specific definition that you can read in the class description. And I apologize, we didn't have that listed out completely in the JEL, but if we had, it just that JEL would go from 9 to 30 pages real quickly. But you can see the exact definition for that very soon. Is the Crim 1 the intern level? Yeah, we mentioned a little earlier. The word intern is not used consistently around the state. Crim 1 is what we would now refer to as the entry level. The word intern out in the world usually means like a pre-intern level, and we're actually working on that internally with DPA to sort of look at where that term is used around the state and what we might be able to do to make that more consistently used. How does the current Crim 2 align with a new forensic scientist? So, I can't say exactly. Forensic science, at least my understanding, forensic science is a separate field from criminal investigation. Again, there might be some overlap, but I would not say that there is a one-to-one relationship where all Crim 2s that are now forensic scientists were then moved to that level. So when you get that individual classification, if you have a letter, if you have questions about it, reach out with questions at that time. JEL states in one place that union supervisor, we did talk about that. The charts are correct. How was the pay differential between agent and investigator determined? Why was agent paid more? That's based on market data, not just my opinion or anybody's opinion. Will there be more guidance released on how one would jump from a 2 to a 3? Again, the class placement, a class is based on the position description. So if for a position to change from a 2 to a 3, an individual position, the position description would have to change. Tables for base salary, cost and minimum have columns for number of employees in each range. If this has already been preliminarily decided, why isn't that information being shared? Because it's still preliminary and it's not official yet. And we, actually those calculations were primarily done in order so that we could go to the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, and let them know what some of these system maintenance studies might cost. But we don't want to provide information that then, becomes different in the future. So I appreciate that question. But again, it's because they are preliminary. What is the contingency plan if an investigator comes in at a higher class, therefore raising the budget for an agency, but that particular agency does not have the appropriate funding for the wage increases? Is JBC aware that this is coming down the line? JBC is aware. Agencies are aware of what the budget impact will be. And in all the cases that I'm aware of, agencies will be able to absorb the budget with their cash funded. But then if they're not cash funded, it will be funded by the budget. We do have 5 minutes left. I'm really going to try to get to all of these. If a criminal investigator 2 most closely aligns with criminal investigator 4, can you give an example of who would align? So for field agent 4, yeah, I can't really say exactly. That's a different series. I would say the reason I mentioned that with CI2 and a CI4 is because it could be confusing when you see criminal investigator 1 over here and then criminal investigator 1 over here. Field agent is truly a new series, but I will say that, field agent 1 is considered entry, field agent 2 is intermediate, field agent 3 is fully operational, which is similar to that criminal investigator series. So, take that for what it's worth, and then you'll get a chance to see your individual class placement when we send those letters out. A management position is subject to Cohen's decisions, even though they have no representation. My understanding is no. Management positions are not covered, but I want to be careful here because the term management can mean different things to different people. And I believe there is a specific definition of what a manager is that Cohen's uses, but I just don't know that off the top of my head. Would there be a defined amount of time that someone would be an entry level Crim 1? There is not a defined amount of time. It would be individually based on the position description. Who was the field agent class created for? It was created for the whole state. That series is available to be used by any agency. You said a current Crim 3 agent in charge. So just so you know, when I look at these, I don't think about working titles like agent in charge. Crim 3, current Crim 3 most closely aligns with new Crim 5. Sorry, I didn't mean that sound, I completely understand why you put that in there. You said a current CRIM 3 most closely aligns with the new CRIM 5, but you previously said a CRIM 5 is a supervisor, and we currently have CRIM 2 SMEs and CRIM 2 supervisors that are paid differently within the same range. Yeah, that's part of why we're adding more levels. I mentioned earlier there could be two jobs that should be in different levels, but have been collapsed into one because we don't have enough levels available for agencies to use. We only have 1 minute. I'm going to try to get through these, and I do believe we have to stop at noon, but it seems that there's a big rush to get these new classifications done. Several issues have been pointed out, which you've acknowledged, so I don't have a lot of confidence that DPA has given this process the thought. We've been working on this for over a year. This is the best alignment we have at this time. We do these meet confers so that we can assess feedback. And, like I said, we do not expect any major changes at this point. But, hypothetically, if we realize that we screwed the whole thing up, we can put the kibosh on it and not do it. But this is not a rush job. We've been working on this for over a year. Regarding this question, answer this again, please. Is the field agent classification being applied to only one agency? No. It is available to use at any agencies, and I don't want to give you some wrong information now and then have it changed. And, I don't want to say one agency or the other because I don't want to imply that everybody at DOC or everybody at DOR, everybody at DPS is going to be one thing or the other because, that may or may not be the case. Why is there a large pay disparity amongst criminal investigators in different agencies? If you're talking about salaries, I can't say for sure. For pay ranges, pay ranges assigned to classifications are the same, regardless of the agency. The field agent series does not only apply to one agency. It's available for use at all agencies. That's the next question as well. Can you speak to whether there is risk to forensic scientists being designated as a safety officer for para? So I would actually reach out to your HR team about that. I'm actually not sure about the definition of safety officer, if it's in statute or para. So actually maybe reach out to your HR team about that particular question. And then if we need to escalate it to back to DPA, we can certainly do so. Where can we see the pay classes for field agents compared to CIs? Those are available in the job evaluation letter. We're down to 20. So maybe Annabelle, we can just try to get through these. None of the agencies that you listed as being surveyed for investigator pay their investigators differently based on which type of crime they investigate. Why does the state feel that it should pay the position differently? I would say there are actually different classifications that different agencies use. For example, a detective at an agency might be different than a police officer, and they might have a different pay range. So we base our pay range decisions based on what we see in the market, and that's exactly what we did during this study. Will supervisors be at a higher level to their direct reports? According to the series, the supervisor and SME will be equal. Typically I would expect a supervisor to be in a higher class than their direct report. I can't speak to individual positions. And SME could mean different things in different agencies, but yeah, typically I would expect a supervisor to be in a higher classification, higher level than their direct reports. Who has input on where somebody will be reclassified to? We addressed that. It was a combination, collaboration. We relied on HR teams to sort of drive it, and then DPA served as a reviewer. What if your current PD is not accurate? You can appeal that. That is a separate appeal from system maintenance study. So if you do believe your position description is not accurate, you can follow that process. How is time in class preserved for a new classification of field investigator? So that's something that we're doing within the STEP team. I would again refer you to that STEP Pay website where we have FAQs, and that is actually addressed. A series that is deconsolidated, like that's what we're doing here. We're taking the criminal investigator series and we're deconsolidating it into multiple series. So time spent in that original series is still going to count towards your time as a field investigator. Do pay range maximums move up when there's an ATB raise? So salary increases are actually separate from pay range increases. In a lot of years in the state, historically, doesn't mean we have to do it this way, or doesn't mean that we ought to do it this way, but historically at the state, a lot of times the salary structure, the pay ranges, have been assigned the same percentage as salary across the boards. But a salary increase across the board increase, that's referring to salaries, which are different than pay ranges. So, I would say actually short answer is no, not necessarily. But in most years, yeah, I would expect pay range maximums to go up, but not necessarily at the exact same percentages as the salary increases. For clarification, we will receive a letter in February telling us what our new class will be based on DPA. Yeah, so you'll get a letter that will say your new classification, your new pay range. Will forensic scientists keep their sworn status? I would assume so, and I think things like that on individual positions are not changing. But me as us as the comp unit, we didn't really talk about things like that. That's sort of related to, I think, the requirements listed in a position description, and position descriptions should not change as a result of this. Recent step pay video mentioned that the SSPT2 job series was universal and could be added to one current job series. SSPT2, I'm actually not familiar with what that is. Step pay video mentioned that job series was universal and could be added to ones. Maybe you're talking about general professional, perhaps. What I can say is that a series that was consolidated or deconsolidated, those series changes that have occurred over time will be reflected and still counted towards a employees time in class series. But again, you want to wait for that letter that will come out on March 31st. I know we're chomping at the bit. Trust me, DPA would like to get that information out as quickly as we can, but we want to make sure it's exactly correct. And because of some of those challenges with disparate systems, antiquated systems, it actually is quite challenging. And but we do expect it to be completed by the time we get those letters out. Can you clarify if you're currently a criminal investigator 2 in the para safety chart and you are reclassified to forensic scientist 3? Will you still be on the same para chart? I might actually refer you to your internal HR team for that one. They would know more about which titles and which statutes apply to different classifications in terms of para. My focus is mostly on base salaries. But I know there are certain statutes that apply specifically to these positions, and your HR teams, I think, will know. And if not, we will get together, we'll escalate, and we'll make sure we research that for you. If I'm a field agent in a homicide position and move internally in my agency to a computer crimes position, will I be demoted to a criminal investigator? Every classification is based on the position description. So I can't necessarily speak to specific crimes as far as what might be in one area of an agency, what might be in another area of the agency. But yeah, you would know what your new classification would be prior to moving into any new position. So you could certainly make your decision based on that in case it is a different grade. But to my understanding, it sounds like you're asking more about like a voluntary move, which I would not typically, even if you did go down, I wouldn't call that a demotion if it's a voluntary move. There are many current state criminal investigators that are not post-certified. If the new CI classification is post-certified, what happens to those current investigators that are not post-certified? That's a good question. That's another one I might refer you to HR, your internal HR. Maybe I was made aware at some point, but I actually don't recall. I believe that my understanding is that criminal investigators primarily are post-certified, but definitely reach out to your HR. I don't believe that will change. And again, I will say the minimum qualifications, we are not planning on rolling out until January 1st. So my intent, the study team's intent, would not be to, change a position description's requirements. So if the position description does not currently require post-certification, I can say that will be true. That will also be true going forward. The current and reclassified requirements, PDQs for the criminal investigator series available somewhere. So the class descriptions are what we're looking at. with this study. We're not looking at individual. We're not changing anybody's position description as a result of this study. You can certainly dispute what's in your position description through the processes and mechanisms that are already in place. But what will be available, at least in context of the study, will be the classification descriptions. Specialized duties seem to be missing from the Criminal Investigator series and do not fully account for the complex statewide duties in many of those roles. For example, forensic, cyber investigations, specialized gaming investigations. Statewide impacts exist in many of these roles and are not an isolated, localized jurisdiction. Is there a procedure to get these complex, highly skilled roles and duties accounted for in compensated form? Yeah, again, I think this goes back to the position description and what is defined in there and which of the series most closely fits that. Specialized duties seem to be missing from, yeah, we didn't necessarily list out specific duties that might apply to individual specialized positions, largely because these classifications do have to apply to a range of positions. We can't have like a different series for every single specialization that exists within all of these different fields. If it's different enough and carries a different enough market rate, that's when we would typically want to make sure that we're looking at that. But we wouldn't identify every single specialization that exists within a certain series. Why is our pay scale so long? 30 years. If I'm a criminal investigator too, it will take 30 years to max out. Not necessarily. The step pay program is set up that way. The step pay program was designed in collaboration with Cohen's. Yeah, and I can't really say why it might take long to get to the max of a range. The only rule with steps is that no one can be paid below their step. There's nothing that says an agency can't pay higher than that, as long as they're treating folks consistently with their processes and policies. Any contingencies where subordinate employees will make more than a supervisor? That's a great question. And we do know that there will likely be some cases once steps are implemented that some supervisors may be earning less than their direct reports. This is one area where I am comfortable sharing my personal opinion about that. As a comp person, I would say a best practice is to avoid that when possible. There absolutely could be situations where it could be appropriate. Say you have a manager in a pay grade that's one level higher. The pay grade's one level higher, but they oversee somebody who's been here 30 years and as a result is high in their pay range. But this is a brand new manager. Therefore, they're paid lower in their range. That could happen. But I can tell you this, DPA is aware that this is occurring, and we do plan on having even a project to look at these. And what will likely have to happen is we'll have to look at those cases case by case. So that's a great question, and it is something that we're aware of and thinking about within DPA. Where can we find the definition of a work leader? Is referenced in the JEL memo, but not defined. There will be a full definition in the draft class descriptions that Annabelle and I will get together shortly after this meet and confer, and we'll get these out there. Just keep in mind they're still drafts. So as you read through those, know that they're drafts, and then we'll post the final ones after the comment period and after we've had a chance to sort through the revisions and possible edits we may incorporate. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, anonymous attendee. All right, so we're well over time, and it looks like we've gotten all of the ones answered. So if you're still on the call, thank you very much for your feedback, and looking forward. Here we got another one coming in. So if we fall under CRIM 2 with 4 years with time and our pay is higher, will we fall under the save pay program? No one will move down to their step. Save pay only applies if you're above the max of the pay range. No one will be above the max of their range as a result of this study. But yes, if you are above the max, and this applies everywhere, after 3 years, your rate would go down to that new max, if it were still above. who do we provide feedback to about naming conventions? Feel free to send that to me. Feel free to send that to your HR team. Maybe you could even include both of us on the on that. But I would actually be interested to hear various opinions about naming conventions, as that was a discussion topic. Can't say that we're going to make, we're not we're not, there might not be agreement across all agencies about what those should be. So I can't say we're going to incorporate every suggestion that we get, but please feel free to send that to myself and or to your HR team. All right. We might have to cut it off there. I really appreciate everybody's questions. So please keep sending those in, and thanks again for being here today.